The town of Willow Creek had always known him as the cold cowboy, the man who rode in silence, whose hat brim shadowed a pair of eyes as hard as flint, whose wealth made women linger with hope, and whose heart seemed untouched by the warmth of affection. His name was Colton Hayes, and the land he owned stretched farther than the eye could wander, golden fields of wheat and cattle ranches that poured riches into his pockets. Yet he lived alone in his mansion at the edge of town, where silence was his only companion. Women, beautiful in lace and silk, came in waves to try and thaw him, blondes with charming smiles, brunettes with sharp wit, redheads with fiery tempers, but Colton's answer was always the same, a polite tip of his hat and a distance that could not be crossed. Folks whispered that he was carved from stone, too proud, too cold to ever love, but they were wrong. His heart had only been waiting for someone unexpected. She came into town one summer morning, a woman whose presence was like a melody cutting through the noise of gossip and prejudice. Her name was Naomi, skin kissed by the sun, eyes deep with wisdom and sorrow, a widow who had traveled miles seeking work, carrying only a small satchel and the strength of her spirit. She was unlike the polished beauties of Willow Creek. She walked with dignity, not vanity, and though her dress was plain, her grace outshone them all. But in this town, where judgment ran faster than compassion, she was seen first for her skin before her soul. Whispers chased her footsteps, eyes narrowed and doors closed. But she did not bow her head. She found work at the small bakery, rising before dawn to knead dough with hands that had known both labor and love, and she smiled even when no one returned it. Colton first saw her when he stopped at the bakery for black coffee, and she lifted her gaze to him with neither awe nor fear, but simple acknowledgement. That moment carved into him deeper than he could explain, for she treated him not as the rich, cold cowboy, nor as the untouchable rancher, but as a man who existed, who could be seen. He found excuses to return, first for coffee, then for bread, then for nothing at all, only to stand in her presence. Naomi spoke little but with warmth. She asked about his day as though it mattered, and when he answered, her smile carried no hidden intention, no agenda. For the first time, he felt warmth breaking through his winter walls. But soon the town noticed, and the storm began to brew. Women who had chased him with their beauty turned their bitterness on Naomi, whispering that she had no right to steal his attention, that she did not belong in their circle, that she was less than what he deserved. Men scoffed that Colton had lost his mind, that he would shame his family legacy, that his ranch deserved a woman of their kind. At first, Colton ignored it, but the cruelty grew louder, and Naomi bore the brunt of it. Customers who refused her bread, insults, disguised as laughter, even stones thrown at her doorstep. She stood strong, but Colton's cold heart could no longer watch in silence. One evening, under the copper glow of the setting sun, he rode his horse straight into the center of town, where the saloon porch was crowded with gossipers. He dismounted, boots striking the dust with authority, and when he found Naomi walking home with her basket, he did what no one expected. He reached for her hand, lifted it high, and pressed a kiss against her knuckles for all to see. The crowd gasped. Women stiffened, men muttered, but Colton's voice cut through like thunder. "I've heard enough. This woman, Naomi, is worth more than all your whispers, more than all your painted smiles. She is my choice, and if the whole town stands against her, then you stand against me." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Naomi's sharp intake of breath, for never had anyone defended her so boldly, never had anyone lifted her above shame. That night his mansion doors opened to her, and though some swore it was scandal, others saw truth in the way his once cold eyes softened when they rested on her. Weeks turned into months, and their bond only deepened. Naomi's laughter filled halls once hollow. Her strength matched his, and together they worked the land as equals. Yet the opposition did not die easily. Men tried to sway Colton with threats of business ruin. Women tried to lure him back with promises of social acceptance, but he remained unmoved, his loyalty as unshakable as his word. "I'd rather live as an outcast with her," he told them, "than a king among you." Slowly, cracks appeared in the wall of prejudice. Townsfolk saw Naomi teaching children to read beneath the oak tree, saw her tending the sick with gentle hands, saw her kindness unshaken even when cruelty was thrown her way. One by one, hearts softened, not by argument but by witness. The bakery that once lost customers now overflowed, for no bread tasted sweeter than that made by love's perseverance. The cold cowboy had become warm, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because he had chosen love above fear. And when the first snowfall blanketed Willow Creek that winter, Colton stood with Naomi at the edge of his land, arm around her shoulders, eyes no longer cold but alive with fire, and whispered, "You were the only one who ever saw me. Naomi, not the riches, not the ranch, me. And I will spend my days making sure the world sees you as I do." She smiled, tears glistening in the frosted air, for she knew then that love had defied the whole town and won. And dear viewers, if this story stirred your heart, remember, love is strongest when it stands against the world, and courage is proven not by silence but by boldness. Just as Colton chose Naomi despite the odds, you too can choose to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. If you want more stories of love, courage, and defiance that break barriers and warm the soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others, because together, we can spread stories that remind the world that true love has no boundaries. Winter thawed into spring, and though Colton and Naomi had carved out a life of love within the wide walls of his ranch, the shadow of the town's disapproval still lingered like smoke after a fire. Some folks had softened, seeing Naomi's strength and goodness, but others remained bitter, clinging to their prejudices as though they were heirlooms to be protected. Naomi, despite Colton's protection, felt their eyes whenever she walked into the general store, heard their whispers when she passed by the churchyard, and sensed the quiet rejection that no spoken word could deny. Yet she carried herself with the same grace she had on the day she arrived, meeting hostility with dignity and cruelty with silence, believing that patience and kindness would melt even the hardest hearts. But Colton, the once cold cowboy now warmed by love, found patience harder to muster when it came to the woman who had changed his life. His wealth had once kept him untouchable, but now it became a target. Men who once smiled in his presence now sought to undermine him. Women who once coveted him now spat Naomi's name as if it were a curse. Some ranch hands who had worked for him for years began to drift away, claiming better offers elsewhere. Though Colton knew the truth, they could not stomach working for a man who stood so openly against the town's prejudice. One night, as rain lashed against the windows of the ranch house, Colton sat before the fire, boots stretched out, hat on the table beside him, watching Naomi sew a patch into one of his old shirts. He had lived his life among riches, yet nothing had ever felt as rich as that moment. Her slender fingers mending cloth that no one else would bother with, her presence filling the silence with peace. "Naomi," he said quietly, "I've fought cattle rustlers, storms, even hunger in the early days, but none of it ever unsettled me like this fight. The whole town against us. I can stand it for myself, but for you..." His voice broke slightly, rare for a man known for iron control. Naomi lifted her gaze, her eyes warm and steady. "Colton Hayes," she answered, her voice gentle but firm. "I knew the cost of love the day I met you. I knew whispers would follow and storms would rise, but I also knew I'd rather face them with you than live in comfort without love. Let the town rage. Let them whisper. What we have cannot be, broken by their fear." Her words were a balm to his restless spirit, but even as he pulled her into his arms, determination hardening in his chest, the world outside was sharpening its claws. The opposition took on a new shape in the form of William Turner, the wealthiest merchant in Willow Creek, a man whose pride had been wounded when Colton turned his back on the respectable women of the town to choose Naomi. Turner had a daughter, Clarissa, whose beauty had been paraded before Colton for years, and though she had been the envy of many, Colton had shown her no more attention than the others. Humiliation had soured into hatred, and now Turner sought revenge. He spread rumors through the town that Naomi was using witchcraft to ensnare Colton, that she had come not as a widow seeking honest work but as a schemer who would drain him of his fortune. At first they were whispers, but soon they grew into accusations spoken in the saloon, in the church pews, even in the mayor's office. The poison spread, and while some dismissed it as bitterness, others clung to the lie because it gave them reason to justify their prejudice. Colton, hearing the rumors, rode into town one morning and stormed into the saloon, where Turner sat smugly with his glass of whiskey. The cowboy's boot struck the wooden floor with fury, his hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip, and the room hushed as he stood before Turner. "You think lies will break me?" Colton's voice was low, dangerous. You think a coward's tongue can undo what's stronger than your money? Stronger than this town's ignorance? You can take your whispers and choke on them, Turner. Naomi is mine, and no man, not you or your spoiled daughter, will change that. His words thundered through the saloon, but the fire in Turner's eyes promised the battle was far from over. Naomi, though shielded from some of the venom, was not blind to the growing hostility. She prayed quietly at night, her hands folded, asking for strength not just for herself but for Colton, who carried the weight of both their worlds on his shoulders. Yet she never wavered in her devotion, and that constancy became the foundation on which Colton stood taller than ever before. He began inviting townsfolk to the ranch, not to flaunt his wealth but to show them Naomi's heart. They saw her tending to injured horses with patience, cooking meals for the ranch hands who had stayed, reading stories to the neighbor children who wandered over. Little by little, suspicion cracked, and a few brave souls began to see what Colton had known all along, that Naomi's worth was not bound to her skin, but to her spirit. But for every heart that softened, others hardened. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning when Naomi walked into the town's church. She had been hesitant, knowing the stares she would draw, but she longed for a place to worship openly, to lift her voice in song. Colton walked beside her, his tall frame a shield, his hand firmly clasped in hers. The church fell silent as they entered, and though the preacher welcomed them with a strained smile, many pews shifted as families pulled away, refusing to sit near them. Naomi knelt and prayed anyway, her voice rising soft but unwavering, and as Colton looked down at her, pride surged through him. Yet the moment was shattered when Turner stood, his voice loud, declaring, "This is an abomination. This woman has no place in our house of God, and this cowboy has lost his soul to her." Gasps filled the church. But before the preacher could speak, Colton rose to his feet, his voice booming with the authority of a man who would not bend. "You call yourself righteous, Turner, yet you know nothing of love, nothing of God's truth. This woman shows more grace, more kindness, more strength than you'll ever know. If this house has no place for her, then it has no place for me." And with that, he took Naomi's hand and led her out, leaving behind a congregation divided, some ashamed, some seething, but all unable to deny the fire of his conviction. Their love had become not just a personal bond but a revolution, a challenge to the very fabric of a town built on prejudice. And though the cost was heavy, loss of friends, strained business, constant threats, Colton and Naomi stood together, stronger with each trial. That summer, when the ranch faced its greatest test, a drought that threatened to ruin the cattle, Naomi worked beside Colton under the scorching sun, her dress stained with dust, her hands blistered, yet never once complaining. Townsfolk watched, some with scorn, others with awe, as the woman they once ridiculed labored harder than any of them to save the land. And when rain finally came, breaking the drought, Colton declared before all who would listen that it was Naomi's faith, Naomi's strength that had carried them through. By the time autumn rolled in, the town could no longer ignore the truth. Naomi had not broken Colton. She had made him greater than he had ever been. And though many still clung to their bitterness, others began to change, not because of speeches or force, but because love lived out before their eyes could not be denied. Naomi had become the heart of the Hayes Ranch, and Colton, once the cold cowboy, had become its fire. Together they had defied the whole town, and together they would build a legacy that no rumor, no prejudice, no opposition could ever erase. And dear viewers, if this story of resilience, courage, and love breaking chains speaks to your heart, remember, true love is not about choosing the easiest path but the right one, even when the world stands against you. Colton and Naomi's story reminds us that love knows no boundaries, no colors, no limits. If you believe in stories that inspire and strengthen the soul, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others, because together we can keep spreading tales of courage, faith, and love that defy the odds.